There's a standoff right now between protesters and police on the West Side Highway here in New York, where it appears protesters have shut down part of the West Side Highway. This in response to the decision of the grand jury not to indict a police officer who put a chokehold or arm around the neck of Eric Garner as he said, "I can't breathe," 11 times before dying. Joining me now is Ta-Nehisi Coates, senior editor for The Atlantic. All right, Ta-Nehisi, where do we start with this? What was your reaction today when you heard the news?
These guys are in danger.
I would like to say that I was surprised. I was not surprised. I was not shocked at all. I think we expect our grand juries to exist outside of the context, outside of the forces that affect ordinary human beings, ordinary Americans who live in this country, and that just isn't true. Laws, grand juries, all of our hallowed institutions, they are what the people make them to be ultimately. They don't exist on some other plane, immune from other forces like American racism. So I'd like to say I was shocked and surprised. I was not, regrettably.
I saw you saying earlier today, or I think you might have tweeted this, the way we've been having this discussion is about the intersection of policing and racial bias. And
right.
You were saying, let's not hold the police out as an institution that is the one institution in American life particularly tainted by racial bias.
Right. Well, I mean, the history of this country is, we have this long history of racism in this country, and as it happens, the criminal justice system has been perhaps the most prominent instrument for administering racism. But the racism doesn't actually come from the criminal justice system. It doesn't come from the police. The police are pretty much doing, what the society that, they originate from want them to do. If you can look at any number of studies on how African Americans are perceived in terms of criminality versus other Americans. You can look at the long history of criminalizing black people in this country, which did not begin with Eric Garner, which did not begin with Tamir Rice, which did not begin with John Crawford. This is a very, very old tradition in this country, and the expectation that the police, that our grand juries, that our prosecutors will exist outside of history is I think, a grave mistake. I think we have to, come to some sort of terms with the country that we're living in.
Okay, so if that's true, then how do you avoid either fatalism or impotent rage? I mean, what do you do?
I don't know that you avoid infinite rage. I mean, I don't know that infinite rage can be, I walk around with it. Baldwin talked about this, to be black in America is to walk around, all afire, enraged constantly. So I don't know that you can, avoid that. In terms of avoiding fatalism, listen, I'm the descendant of enslaved black people in this country. You could have been born in 1820 if you were black and looked back, to your ancestors and saw nothing but slaves all the way back to 1619. Look forward another 50 or 60 years and saw nothing but slaves, forward. There was no reason at that point in time to believe that emancipation was 40 or 50 years off. And yet folks resisted and folks fought on. So, fatalism isn't really an option. Even if you think you're not going to, necessarily win the fight today in your lifetime, in your child's lifetime, you still have to fight. I mean, it's kind of selfish to say that you're only going to fight for a victory that you will live to see. As an African American, I mean, we stand on the shoulders of people who fought despite not seeing victories in their lifetime, or even in their children's lifetime, or even in their grandchildren's lifetime. So fatalism isn't really an option.
Right now, as you and I are talking, Ta-Nehisi, there's an image that we're showing of folks who are marching down, I believe that is the West Side Highway, and they've shut it down. There have been a wave of protest ever since that grand jury decision was announced in Ferguson over a week ago. And one of the things I think that you keep pointing out in your writing is that at the time that protests happen, a lot of people are talking about how they're not the right kind of protest. They're too disruptive,
right,
or they're not accomplishing the right thing. And then 40 years later, or 50 years later, the people who organize them get put on stamps. But then we forget that when they were actually happening, people they thought they were too disruptive.
Listen, the protest is against, the policies, or the inaction of policies by the American state. To expect the American state to then approve those protests at the same time is a little insane. It's easy to approve the protests 40 years later, when you don't have to deal with Martin Luther King, when you're not Bobby Kennedy and having, to worry about, balancing laws, federal laws and state laws. But people in that time, in the time of the actual protest, don't approve. In fact, if a protest that's approved of isn't, it kind of defeats itself. It's not actually a protest. It's not a protest. What are you protesting, if everybody agrees?
Ta-Nehisi, where do you think Do you think right now there is something about this moment that's kind of I mean, it just feels today like on the heels of what happened in Ferguson, with the video of the shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice, with the way that social media operates and the camera phones operating, we now have a kind of consciousness of what's happening that we weren't able to get before in quite the same way. And whether that galvanizes something nationally, what do you think?
Maybe. You know, I don't know. I hope so. I would like to think so. I would like to think that, you know, what effectively was the drive-by killing of an 11-year-old child would galvanize something. But Chris, I really hate to keep going back to this, but, you know, we are under the weight of some 350 years of state-sanctioned racism and about 50 years of just halfway trying to dig our way out of that. To expect things to change because, you know, a few cases over the past few months, I think is to expect too much. This is a long fight. I'm not calling for fatalism. I'm not calling, you know, for giving up. But, you know, we got to be tougher than to just, you know, expect that, you know, oh, because suddenly we're aware, or those of us who, you know, watch and love MSNBC are aware, that necessarily means the change is around the corner.
Ta-Nehisi, I want you to stay with me, and I want to bring in MSNBC political analyst, former RNC chairman Michael Steele into this conversation. And Michael, today I was happy to see a kind of cross-ideological, bipartisan unanimity. Charles Krauthammer and Andrew Napolitano on Fox News and people on Red State saying, this is outrageous, this is ridiculous. Here's my question for you. Is that going to last? Because I remember people reacting that way to the Trayvon Martin death. I actually remember people reacting that way to the SWAT teams in Ferguson, and then it didn't last. And then what happened, you know, Losey's many months later was conservatives in my Twitter feed saying the most vile, execrable stuff I could imagine. So my question is, can this be a moment where there is some kind of bipartisan consensus about the fact that policing and the criminal justice procedures in this country are in some deep fundamental sense broken?
Well, I guess I kind of have come at this with a mixed answer, and that would be, I don't see this strictly in the political lens, Chris. So this idea of will it last, whether, you know, if Republicans engage or Democrats engage, I think this is really about what the American people need to do at this point. I've been saying for some time, we fundamentally have to deal with the quintessential issues around race, the black and white of race in this country. This is not about Hispanics. This isn't about Asians. This is not about women. This is about black people and white people in this country. As Mr. Coates just noted, we're talking about 350 years of this struggle. So to bring it down to what Republicans and Democrats do, to me, doesn't really get to where we need to go. But having said that, I will say that the idea that you do have this bipartisan recognition, the Republicans along with others recognizing that we need to move on this, Rand Paul being one of the leading voices with respect to criminal justice reform, looking at our justice system as a whole, I think is an important step.
Ta-Nehisi, even given the weight of all the history that we know we have, and given the inheritance the criminal justice system has, which is laid out in Michelle Alexander's great book, New Jim Crow, among other places, as being an institution in American life that patrols the boundary of kind of racial power and hierarchy, we could also have that same history and have half as many people in prison as we have now, with some fairly straightforward reforms to the kinds of laws we have in policing we do.
Yeah, but I think the question that has to be asked is why haven't those reforms happened? And I think that takes you back to the society itself, you know. And so I think in many ways, you know, this conversation about policy, about policing practices, you know, even extending it out to mass incarceration, I think that we should not let ourselves as a society off the hook. There are reasons why, you know, these policies exist. Look, either we live in a democracy or we don't, you know, and, you know, maybe some would argue that we don't, but if we're going to accept that, you know, we do, if we're going to accept that votes matter, that the process matters, then, you know, we can't avoid fundamental truths, you know, about people who are deciding what the government will be. Jefferson says that the people get the government that they deserve, you know, in a democracy. And I think that's kind of where we're at.
Michael.
Hey, Chris, can I just dovetail right onto that? And it goes back to your last conversation. The prosecutors in both the Ferguson case and in this case prosecuted to the extent that they wanted to. And at the end of the day, they either will vigorously apply this process on behalf of the victim, or they won't. And if they're out to protect a class of individuals, this system will not survive, and I think we're seeing evidence of that.
So you don't think they were trying to vigorously prosecute this?
No, come on. I mean, look, at the end of the day, just in looking at the video itself, I mean, you may not want to go for first-degree murder, but then you've got assault, you've got all sorts of other issues that fall underneath that.
You even have a New York statute that makes it illegal to choke people.
Right.
There's literally.
You know, you had other options.
So if you don't vigorously want to prosecute this system for the benefit of the victims, then this system will not work.
And that gets to what the essential nature of the system is, right? Which is,
exactly,
do we have equal justice under law or don't
Yeah.
we? And there's a lot of people asking some pretty profound and deep questions about the nature of that. You see some of them walking through the streets tonight in New York in spontaneous protest, walking up the West Side Highway with cars there. They've fanned out across the city. That we've seen protests as well in Philadelphia, some in Ferguson as well, and all in reaction to this very shocking, I might say, decision from the grand jury not to indict the police officer that led to the death of Eric Garner. Ta-Nehisi Coates and Michael Steele, thank you, gentlemen, both. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris.